Welcome to Atlas Live, Atlas Public Policy's video podcast that brings together industry and policy leaders for timely discussions about clean technology, transportation, the built environment, manufacturing, climate change, and more.
Hi, welcome to the latest episode of Atlas Live. I am Stephen Naimoli. I'm your host today. I'm a policy analyst here at Atlas, and I'm excited to talk to you today about energy efficiency. First, I want to start off by giving just a little bit of a level setting, kind of setting the scene. Energy affordability is, top of mind for voters right now. Lawmakers in states across the country are scrambling to figure out how to reduce these burdens on households. In some states, this has led them to looking at energy efficiency programs. These programs are often funded via a surcharge on utility bills. And so this is something that's very visible to households as a charge that is being levied on them. But energy efficiency is valuable. According to the International Energy Agency, about best-in-class appliances can save 40% of costs, including the purchase price, when compared to their inefficient counterparts. But still, the many factors that go into rising energy bills are complicated, and they're often not very visible to ratepayers. And so legislators that are looking to try to figure out how to cut costs and help people save money any way they can may still turn towards energy efficiency programs. No, not all states that consider cutting these programs end up doing so. While, for example, Maryland has passed a bill that has placed some changes on the state's energy efficiency programs, changing how much what the ambitious targets that the utilities have to meet, which ultimately may reduce the spending and the energy efficiency that the households are able to get. In other places, Rhode Island's legislature, for example, kind of rebuked the governor's proposed spending caps on the state's energy efficiency programs. And in Massachusetts, the Senate refused to take up the $1 billion cut to Mass Save that the House had proposed. But ultimately, how did these become targets in the first place? What happened along the way? And what are some of the other things that states could be doing instead to address these rising costs? That's what we're here to talk about today. And to do that, I'm pleased to say that we have two excellent guests to join us. We have Mark Kresowik, who is Senior Policy Director for the American Council for an Energy Efficient Economy, and Bryan Howard, who is State Energy and Climate Policy Manager for the Montgomery County, Maryland Department of Environmental Protection. Mark and Bryan, thanks for being with us today.
Thank you, Stephen.
Thanks. It's great to be here.
So I want to jump kind of right into the meat of it. Mark, is cutting energy efficiency programs going to make energy bills more affordable?
Absolutely not. It does the opposite, right? So when we looked at the Maryland bill and looked at if instead of investing in energy efficiency and achieving higher levels of energy performance, Maryland residents had to instead purchase more energy on the PJM market, which is what they will have to do now. That cost is twice as much. So over the next 3 years, Marylanders are going to pay nearly $600 million more than they would have if instead they were still achieving the levels of energy efficiency that were required before that bill passed. So at the end of the day, energy efficiency is cheaper, it's faster, it delivers on what voters want, which is lower bills in this moment, particularly in the face of rising demand from data centers and other extreme weather. Energy efficiency is the right way to solve this problem right now. If politicians want to deliver on what voters want, which is lower bills, energy affordability, energy efficiency should be the first thing that they choose.
Well said. Bryan, I want to turn to you. One thing that I'm really kind of curious about and thinking about a lot here is, like, Is there anyone who does benefit from cutting energy efficiency like this?
I mean, I think kind of or tagging on to what Mark had already said, I think, what this means is that there's going to be, a much greater need for supply that comes from those who transmit and distribute and provide power to various different customers. So that is people who supply energy. So those are utilities, and those are companies that have power plants or have generation to give to those various different folks. So I mean, really, what we're seeing in this process is the people who benefit from increased supply are those who provide that supply.
Yeah, I think it highlights like this. There's always been a bit of a tension between kind of utilities providing energy supply, and then also utilities are usually the ones that are often the ones that are kind of providing these efficiency programs, and so there's kind of a maybe even like a conflict there that is really kind of coming into view right now, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think conflict is a generous way to say it. I think the challenge, of course, is that, there's a duality that exists because, generally speaking, utilities get paid to provide power, and then they are also being told to save power, which is in certain instances, antithetical to their business model. Certain states have done a good job of providing, incentives in terms of for utilities that meet certain targets, whether they do they're above their, kind of mandated efficiency requirements. There are places where you do see some split ways of providing some additional value or incentive for utilities to be able to do that. Some people are able to, in certain utility commissions, able to monetize some of that efficiency benefit as well. So it's not exactly exactly 100% of a Hobson's choice, but in a lot of instances, it does become a tension point within the utility, and then frankly those who are trying to service that. What's the point of the utility? Is it to provide power, or is it to save power? And those things are difficult to kind of resolve.
This is the role of the utility commissioners, the utility regulators in every state. We have publicly regulated monopoly utilities. This is why we appoint or elect those folks, is to regulate these entities, to make sure that they have the incentives to both deliver reliable, safe, clean electricity, but also lower cost energy. And so, in Maryland, in DC, everywhere across the country, who those utility commissioners are and what they're telling the utilities to do and how they're aligning those financial incentives is one of the most important decisions being made every single day in this country. And so that's where I think people can dig in a little bit more, is engaging in those processes, engaging with those utility regulators, making sure that they're doing their job is critically important.
Yeah, I mean, we definitely, I can say we definitely agree with that here at Atlas. We've published a couple of like digests and newsletters and things over the past several months, kind of talking about, hey, there's PUC elections going on here, here, and here, and they're, while historically they don't get a lot of attention, although recently because of rising bills and a lot of concerns over demand and supply, they're really kind of ramping up in attention and getting a lot more attention where they used to be really sleepy kind of affairs. Um, so we've talked a little bit about Maryland. I had kind of shared in my intro a couple of different states where we've seen, there were debates over the last several months, and maybe they have kind of either passed a bill or made some adjustments or things like that. Where are we still seeing these debates showing up? Mark, if you want to start.
Yeah, certainly. Well, Maryland is actually the only state on the kind of the progressive side that's actually rolled back an energy efficiency standard slightly. Everywhere else, we see last year, Illinois passed their energy affordability bill, which significantly expanded the role of energy efficiency because they recognized that, in fact, energy efficiency is the fastest, cheapest, best way to help meet growing power demand. Virginia did the same thing. Election of a new governor, new legislature. Virginia, particularly focused on low income energy efficiency, making sure those who are most struggling to afford their energy bills get the full benefits of investment in energy efficiency and helping better manage our energy demand. So that was very exciting. We did see in Rhode Island and Massachusetts, you said, places where there had been proposals to cut back. But again, the legislature in Rhode Island said, no, this doesn't make any sense. We need to keep investing in energy efficiency. It helps grow our economy. It's the best way to meet demand. The Massachusetts Senate said the same thing, and instead turned and said, we do need to cut bills. And that's the imperative in this moment. Voters are saying very clearly, we want our energy bills to go down, or at least to stabilize, to not be so volatile. And so the Massachusetts Senate said, let's look and see what's actually driving bills. And what they found is the thing that's driving up bills is gas system expansion, investment in gas pipelines. Maryland, DC, doing the same thing, spending billions of dollars in expanding gas pipelines, replacing gas pipelines without any real safety benefits, right? We're actually seeing no significant difference in the level of safety from these gas system investments. And so that's where the Massachusetts Senate said, we want to lower bills. The best thing we can do is keep going forward with energy efficiency and instead cut back on these accelerated pipeline replacement programs that aren't providing any benefit and in fact are costing ratepayers billions of dollars.
And that's timely that you say that. I was just looking through the kind of reading the news, my various newsletters and stuff this morning, and there's that's in the news right now. So very appropriate that comes up. Bryan, I want to get your perspective where kind of to the question of how did this sort of start in the first place? Why is it that this messaging around if you want to address affordability, you should consider cutting energy efficiency programs? How did that kind of take hold in the first place?
I think it's an interesting, and I mean, obviously it's a complicated question. I think, in some of the introduction that you raised, I think it frankly says a lot. I mean, efficiency in a lot of ways is unfortunately not always the most visible thing that we see in terms of the programs and the benefits that we see from that. As you also said, a lot of utility efficiency programs are assessed as a surcharge, which is a visible part of the bill, which people see, and sometimes people don't necessarily always connect the dots that I got, a new heating equipment piece replaced in my house. That was compliments of the surcharge that I'm getting, but I still see the surcharge. And so I think sometimes there's a little bit of that process that goes into it. I think the other challenge that, especially in places like Maryland, is that there are a number of constraints that are just happening because of other externalities that the General Assembly and this Public Utility Commission and the governor don't control. I think we've probably talked about it in other places or seen it. There's pretty significant escalations from costs and things from the distribution side of things through data centers. Maryland hasn't had a surplus of data center growth. I mean, there has been growth, but we're seeing a lot of the costs being passed on to consumers. I mean, the Maryland Office of People's Counsel has filed a claim at FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, to try to beat back some of those costs and actually have them allocated properly to states that are actually housing the development. Trying to make sure that those costs are actually incurred by those appropriate customers. So I think when you're in this process where you have a slow regulatory process, you have some challenges in terms of what the clear benefits are, and then just a number of other issues as it relates to affordability and what are the levers. I think the legislature felt like there were some opportunities to take some short-term gains and maybe try to make some benefits in other places. So I think that's kind of part of that process. I would say to the General Assembly's credit, while they did change some things as it relates to the efficiency programs the utilities run, they did support and put some additional new money into state programs to advance the deployment of energy efficient heat pumps for residential customers. There are some other things that they're doing with supplementary funds that will help, I think, offset some of the damage that's been done on those issues. But I think, again, I think there's some different ways to do that. Mark raises some interesting questions. I'm sure we'll talk a little more about, what are some of the alternative sets as well. But, I think I wish it was a straightforward answer of how we got here, but I do think, this is something that we didn't just get on here, yesterday. I do think the other thing that's important to flag, and I think certainly something that people who are listening and looking at us need to think about is what are we doing to educate the value of efficiency in this process? I think those in the energy efficiency world, I think, have a very direct knowledge and are able to articulate the benefits. But sometimes it's harder to say, I gave you $1 and it's going to in turn save you $1.50 when you don't actually see the 50 cents back on a utility bill or something of that kind. So I think those are things that are incumbent upon us and some of the other people who work in the industry as policymakers, manufacturers, the different parties that work and support this, that education and empowerment of what we see from the benefits have to be, I think, better and more clearly articulated to customers and ratepayers.
Completely agree. And this really gets to the important role that the utility regulator plays. Once a utility has gotten approval to invest in their distribution system, so the pipelines, the transmission, the distribution lines, substation, feeder, kind of the components of actually delivering power to your home, to your business. Once those are approved, unless they're imprudent and they just waste the money, those costs are going to be on your bill for the next 15, 20, multiple decades, right? It's very, very difficult to roll back those costs. And so those sunk costs we're going to be paying for the next few decades. So if you really want to lower bills, you have to avoid those costs. And the best way to do that, again, is energy efficiency. So this is the evolution that the energy efficiency and demand flexibility movements need to do, is make sure that when we're investing in a more efficient appliance in somebody's home or somebody's business, when we're helping people shift when they are using energy, it actually has to translate over to avoiding those investments in pipelines, substations, feeders, transformers. The way to do that, you have to be very targeted and very specific about where those investments are going. And the utilities are the ones who have that knowledge. And so this gets that really interesting dynamic where the utilities don't necessarily have a great incentive to avoid that spending, but we have to. And that's where the regulator has to step in and say, okay, we need to target these energy efficiency investments to places in the system where those things can be avoided, and make sure the utility then actually avoids those investments. It's an evolution where historically the energy efficiency, demand flexibility, just kind of, to be Oprah, you get an appliance and you get an appliance, anybody gets an energy efficient appliance. We have to be more targeted going forward if we're going to be successful in driving down bills. There's no doubt that energy efficiency and demand flexibility are the cheapest, fastest ways to meet growing demands. But to really drive down bills forward, we have to be a little more strategic.
That's a great point. I think, we talk a lot about, there are so many, there are a lot of things that go into rising bills. We've written a lot. And many have written a lot about how, it's not just one thing. It's not the data centers. It's not, the gas prices. Nothing. It's a whole bunch of different things. But I think that the infrastructure is really, really important, a really important piece here. And I think often maybe less understood by the general public, because it's, how, in some ways, how could you understand? I mean, it's a pretty opaque process. It is, it's not something that, like, when you're wondering, when you're turning on your lights, you're turning on your AC, whatever, you're not necessarily thinking about, I wonder what the pipelines look like, or I wonder what how much they're spending on transmission lines, things like that. So these are really things. I think, to get back to the point that you both made, I think it's really incumbent on us, on the community, to kind of help people understand these are all the factors that are going into your bills. These are all of the things that that the utilities are spending on that are beneficial, but maybe could be distributed in different ways, things like that.
Yeah, and you're not thinking about things like interconnection queues and permitting. And yet we see one of the biggest drivers in bills in the mid-Atlantic, certainly affecting Maryland, for instance, and DC and Virginia, Pennsylvania, is the fact that wind and solar, there are hundreds of power plants that are proposed to be built in this region that aren't getting built because the grid operator, so PJM, the large entity that manages the bulk transmission system in this region, isn't allowing these projects to move forward through the interconnection process to actually be built. There are other places around the country that have figured this out. And this is, again, where efficiency, demand, flexibility can be a big, huge impact to helping lower costs, in that efficiency, demand, flexibility can be geographically targeted to places in the system that can have the maximum benefit. And it can allow more facilities to be brought online. So Texas, we see something called flexible interconnection, which says, hey, we're going to let you move forward even if the transmission system hasn't been built out fully to meet your full demand, if you agree to dial back at times when this transmission system can't handle it. So that's both on the demand side. So a data center saying, you know what, at peak demand, I'm willing to shut down my operations or scale back my operations. Then we'll be able to get online faster. That kind of flexibility and demand flexibility can be true for industrial loads, for commercial buildings, even residential buildings can shift when they use their demand. That can really lower costs as well and help bring on more resources, which drives down, if wind, solar, drive down the costs for everybody else. So these are things that both efficiency, demand, flexibility can do to lower our bills. We just need to focus and prioritize those resources as opposed to trying to keep legacy, inflexible generation and demand online.
So we've got solutions, we've got action items, and I think one thing that I want to highlight that you're pointing out here is like how interconnected, so to speak, these different sectors are. So we talk a lot about buildings. We're talking about buildings today, but it's it's so important because the power sector is what's determining where that supply is coming from, and and then of course there's transportation. We talk about a lot about here at Atlas that ties in, particularly electrified transportation, where that becomes a demand, like a load source, but also can be flexible and can provide, essentially serve as a battery. There's so much in all of these different areas where energy efficiency can be helpful, can we can use in a clear and smart and coordinated way to to help lower bills, to help address some of these challenges. I do want to pivot a little bit back to just the kind of the legislation question a little bit, because I'm curious, Bryan. I want to get your perspective. We've heard from legislators in Maryland talking about the bill that was passed, and also legislators in Massachusetts in the state house when they were kind of proposing their cuts, that well, these are a pause, or they're temporary changes, or we're redirecting funding and then it's going to come back. You know, are the effects really temporary? And kind of what is the relationship here between if we're reducing the funding, or if we're making changes that will effectively reduce what the utilities can kind of put out, how is that going to affect the number of constituents who can be served?
Yeah, well, thanks. I mean, I think at the onset, I would say I believe that the legislature believes that these are temporary actions. I'm not sure that in 3 years' time, those same people will be here. That the same decision-making calculus and apparatus is going to be the same. And I think historically we've seen this in other places where a freeze or a pause or a change in some of those things that is temporary does not stay temporary and is made more permanent. I think it's incumbent upon people who are active in the General Assembly, as well as with whomever the governor is going to be in Maryland in the future, to stay pretty adamant and stay very vigilant in terms of ensuring that those things, again, that are temporary, are in fact temporary. The way that the legislation that was passed by the governor, is structured is, after this kind of next cycle of efficiency programs, we are slated to see an increase in those actions. Then there's some other things that were offset in the bill that would allow some claiming of other things that happen outside of the utility funded programs to I guess, be claimed as a benefit in terms of that process. So I think those are going to be real key action items in a couple of years time that we need to make sure that again are not going to be changes that are there for the long term. And again, I think that's really incumbent on a lot of people to keep all parties honest in that process. In terms of what it looks like, in terms of what we see of just reducing, so in Maryland, the efficiency targets are based on the percentage of activities. So it's, not dollars based, it's per, percentage of savings based. But I mean, by its nature, when you reduce that, there is going to be some things that are just reduced in terms of services. And I think, there's open conversations now with the Public Service Commission, as well as the utilities that run these programs and advocates and other people who are engaged in the process of what those structures of programs look like. We're just in the process of now kind of figuring out or hearing a little more about what the utilities want to do to rein in those costs and what they want to do. But ultimately, it does likely mean that they can try to run leaner and meaner on their program, so they can try to reduce some of their capacity costs to run that. I don't know how many savings or what kind of process we're going to get out of that. Ultimately, it likely means that people are going to get less out of these programs. And so that means that either the incentives that they get for, an appliance rebate, or, getting, an incentive for putting in more insulation in their homes is maybe going to be reduced, or the number of people who are going to be able to be, contracted to do service provider work for a home energy audit or things of that nature might not be as robust as it has been in the past, just because of the numbers game that's there. So, ultimately, again, there are some ways to probably drive down costs that could be done on the administrative side. But I think more likely what we're going to see is that services are going to be, again, pared down by a consequence of the legislation itself.
Mhm. Bryan talked about services and programs and mentioned contractors. And this is incredibly important, right? There are people whose jobs and livelihoods are invested in helping people save energy, right? People who put the insulation into your homes, who help air seal your homes, who help install your heating and cooling equipment, right? So imagine, so in case of Massachusetts, what the House had proposed was cutting $1 billion out of the Massachusetts energy efficiency programs. The way it was structured, though, that would have all fallen in the third year of the programs, right? Because there needs to be most of these programs are run on 3 or 4 year cycles, uh, which would have essentially destroyed the program in that third year, right? Cutting $1 billion is virtually the entire program for a year. That means if you're a business, you can't just keep your employees around if these investments aren't being happening, right? So you're going to see layoffs. You're going to see people losing their jobs because of these proposed cuts. Not just that people aren't getting better, more efficient equipment, better insulation and air sealing, but that there are thousands of jobs being lost because if the Massachusetts House's proposal had moved forward or still potentially could move forward, right? And so making sure that these programs have sufficient certainty and longevity is both a part of making sure people get these benefits, that we see lower energy bills, but also that the workers, the contractors, the jobs, the businesses that actually make this system run can continue to do their jobs and have jobs and be employed, pay salaries, and ultimately support their families.
Absolutely. I think it's important to always highlight, the kind of the people behind all of these efforts. There are millions of jobs in energy efficiency across the nation, and it's important to remember, you know, how people are affected by these kind of administrative changes or these policy changes or things like that. I want to kind of leave with one last question here. Given, these sorts of things don't happen in a vacuum, we're seeing all kinds of, positive and negative changes, I would say, across the country in terms of energy efficiency, electrification, building decarbonization, things like that. We see new programs all the time, for new rebate programs for heat pumps, new guidance for building electrification, new efforts to kind of make things easier for folks to lower their bills, to adopt more energy efficient appliances, things like that. But then at the same time, Congress is taking aim at federal appliance standards. The U.S. Department of Energy has new guidance for the home energy rebates programs that essentially make it so that you cannot switch from gas or oil or propane to a heat pump, you can only go from electric resistance to a heat pump for the appliance programs. And so kind of putting all of this together, where do we as a country stand on energy efficiency? Mark, why don't we start with you?
This is a moment when energy demands are increasing. We need to make sure that we are lowering people's bills, and the best way to do that is energy efficiency. Maryland is really the only state that has actually rolled back energy efficiency progress so far this year, whereas other states continue to advance it, whether that's Rhode Island, Virginia, New Jersey, Illinois, hopefully Massachusetts here over the next few months. The federal administration, in this moment of record peak heating or heat, trying to keep the lights on, voters demanding energy efficiency. Unfortunately, this federal administration and Congress are trying to roll all that back in order to drive up prices for oil and gas extraction, right? That is their focus. This is a moment, though, where so far, defense of those programs has been successful. They tried to eliminate Energy Star. Energy Star still exists, right? They fired all of the staff from the low-income home energy assistance program, which provides basic life-saving support to help people pay their energy bills. LIHEAP continues. The weatherization assistance program continues. These are critical life-saving investments that need to continue, and we are hopeful that they're going to, especially as we look ahead to future administrations and future Congresses.
Yeah, I mean, I would just say that I think it's really incumbent right now upon, states in terms of whatever actions they're taking, as well as utility commissions and local governments, to hold the line as best as possible. I mean, Montgomery County has had very ambitious climate goals for many years. We continue to make progress in reducing those actions. It's a lot easier to do that when you have a federal partner that's invested in doing that with you. But we, again, continue to find ways to make progress on our own local terms, as well as doing partnerships with various different programs in the states and other areas to keep working to make those things happen. And again, I think hopefully we are in a place where we have a temporary blip and that we go back to some version of normalcy where we have a collaborative partner in the federal government to help make this progress and to help address affordability concerns for our ratepayers.
Great. We love an uplifting end to the episode. Mark and Bryan, thanks so much for being here with us.
Yeah, thank you for being.
And thanks to you. We will see you next time.